All right, good morning, everyone. To those gathered here in Houston and those joining us online. My name is Matt Ewalt. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism. We welcome those joining us for our day-long symposium on the future of our cities, titled A Blueprint for Texas Cities: Growth, Challenges, and Opportunities. The Texas Metropolitan Blueprint, published in early February, lays out a 5-year policy agenda to ensure the long-term prosperity and competitiveness for the state's 26 metropolitan areas, home to 90% of the Texas population. Today, through conversations with authors of the blueprint, along with state and community leaders and Texas-based urban policy experts, we will dig into the blueprint's recommendations and go beyond to consider what makes Texas cities, both large and small, so appealing to the millions of people moving here, and how we can collaborate to address key challenges such as housing affordability, transportation and mobility, economic development, public safety, and ensuring a reliable water supply, all to help our cities thrive. We will celebrate what makes Texas cities so special and discuss the urgent policy action needed during the 2025 Texas legislature to help our city's growth and success over the next 5 years and beyond. And we'll hear from those working at the local level and involving community stakeholders to make sure they have a role in shaping their city's future. Our program runs approximately through to approximately 3:45 today, with panel conversations, 2 15-minute lightning talks, and 2 midday conversations moderated by Texas Tribune Editor-in-Chief Matthew Watkins that dig into aspects of the Texas Blueprint, one being artificial intelligence and the other being climate resilience. For those watching the program from communities throughout the state, just note that we will be taking some breaks during the day, including 45 minutes for lunch and networking. You can use the same video link to rejoin us when we reconvene. And also note that all of our conversations will be available to view on demand in case you're not able to join us live. So just a couple items here. First, the Metropolitan Blueprint. In case you're not familiar with the document, for those joining us in person, there is a QR code on the program itself. You can scan that QR code and view the blueprint in its entirety. Let's also talk about how you can submit questions today. So your questions will help drive today's conversations. And so we can get to as many questions as possible, we'll be doing Q&A through our Q&A portal at texastribune.org/ask. For those joining us in person here in Houston, you'll find signage right at the back of the room there with a QR code, so you can get easy access to that. We also have some note cards there if you just want to go old school and write the question out. You can find me or one of my Tribune colleagues. We'll collect them and ask those questions of our panel. We are always grateful for the support of our sponsors. Our major sponsor for today's program is Methodist Healthcare Ministries, and our supporting sponsor is University of Texas Press. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. We also want to thank our host, University of Houston Downtown. Here to offer a welcome on behalf of the university is Dr. Dan Maxwell, Interim Vice President for Student Success and Student Life for University of Houston Downtown. Dr. Maxwell.
Good morning and welcome to Gator Nation. Appreciate everybody being here in person, and for those of you who are online, it gives me a great pride to welcome you to the University of Houston campus today and to thank you for joining us in the conversation with the Texas Tribune Symposium, a blueprint for Texas cities' growth, challenge, and opportunities. Again, I am Dan Maxwell. I currently serve as the Interim Vice President for Student Success and Student Life here, and on behalf of President Blanchard and the UHD community, I'm here to share how proud we are for our university's partnership with the Texas Tribune. The University of Houston Downtown is committed to growing into the anchor institution of Houston, a commitment that requires an increasingly place-based focus that supports our city's growth, social economic mobility, and safety. Today's symposium addresses issues important to us here at UHD, which makes Texas cities so special and how we can make them even better. Today's speakers will discuss policies outlined in the Texas Metropolitan Blueprint to ensure long-term prosperity and competitiveness, addressing such challenges as housing, affordability, transportation, and economic development. Topics that clearly align with the university's mission to positively impact the city of Houston and the state of Texas. For those of you who are new to the University of Houston downtown, we are the second largest university in Houston, offering 45 bachelor degrees, 12 master's degrees, and 24 of our degree programs offer an online option. We are a comprehensive regional university, educating over 14,000 on average and graduating on average 3,000 students per year. Located in the downtown Houston area, we have great access to the many resources provided to us here in downtown. We have tremendous partners who believe in our mission, and we're pretty close to some fine and casual dining. And quite honestly, the view from our south deck is amazing. So for those of you who are here in person, when you have a break, please walk out back and take a look, take some pictures. We're in a beautiful city doing some beautiful things. To our partners with the Texas Tribune, your commitment to nonpartisan journalism and public discourse helps all of us to be informed and empowered citizens. Thank you for this important work. And to today's speakers, thank you for lending us your expertise as we share and work together to unpack this valuable information. It's now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Joshua Fechter, the moderator for today's first panel of the Texas Metropolitan Blueprint.
All right, so let's go ahead and have our panel join us up on stage, and we'll do some introductions for our first panel. And we're starting a little early, Josh, so you get some bonus minutes for conversation and for Q&A. So let me go ahead and introduce our panel. First panel featuring authors of the Texas Metropolitan Blueprint and being able to dig in to the Blueprint's recommendations. Sherry Greenberg is a professor of practice and fellow of the Max Sherman Chair in State and Local Government at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and she's a professor of practice at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. Additionally, she is the LBJ School Assistant Dean for State and Local Government Engagement, and she's a primary researcher for and chair of Good Systems, the University of Texas Grand Challenge regarding ethical AI. Stephen Pedigo is the Assistant Dean for Faculty of Practice and Policy Engagement at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, and director of the LBJ Urban Lab. He advises city, university, private sector, and nonprofit leaders who want to make their communities and institutions more creative, innovative, and inclusive. And Pablo M. Pinto is a professor at the Hobby School of Public Affairs and director of the Hobby School Center for Public Policy. Pinto's academic research analyzes the various ways in which interactions between economic agents, foreign and domestic, and governments produce distinct economic and political outcomes at home and abroad. Our moderator is Joshua Fechter, the Dallas-based urban affairs reporter for the Texas Tribune, covering policy, including housing affordability, housing and property taxes, evictions, policing and transportation, and politics in Texas's major metropolitan areas. Before joining the Tribune in August 2021, Josh covered City Hall for the San Antonio Express News. I thank our panel for being here. A reminder, you can access the Blueprint using that QR code in your program. And with that, I turn the program over to Josh.
Thanks for that, Matt. And thanks, guys, for being here, for those attending in person and those watching online. We appreciate it. I want to dive right in. The panelists you all see before you are co-authors or among the co-authors of the Texas Metropolitan Blueprint. It's a 5-year policy agenda to ensure the continuing prosperity and growth of Texas's communities. So Stephen, tell us, what is the Blueprint? What does it say, and what does it tell us about the state of Texas's urban areas?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you guys. For those that are in person as well as online, thanks for the opportunity to talk about our work. So the Metropolitan Blueprint is a collaboration between 3 institutions here in Texas, the University of Houston, our colleagues at the George W. Bush Institute in Dallas, as well as the LBJ School. And one of the things that we set out to do in the blueprint is to think about and chart a path forward for what we believe are the pressing issues affecting Texas metropolitan areas. So when you look at the blueprint, we'll talk about these issues today. We dive into the issues of economic development. We look at housing and land use. We talk about our natural resources and challenges that we face with climate. And then we talk about a new kind of pressing issue for us, which is AI and technology. And I know Sherry's going to talk to us about that today. What's interesting about the blueprint and what I want to just highlight is that what makes, I think, the work really interesting is we had a terrific steering committee of public and private leaders, represented folks across the aisle. We talked to more than 175 leaders across the state and had representation from all 26 metropolitan areas. So Texas is an interesting place. We're diverse. We have 26 metros. And so there was real representation from that. And over the course of doing our work, over the course of the year, we engaged focus groups, interview conversations, and that really led to the discussions. And so what you see in the blueprint, I think we as authors take ownership of that work for sure. It's the work that we pull through. But I think as you walk through the recommendations around economic development and those types of things, what you'll notice is that I think it is bipartisan in nature. It is representative of both public and private interests, and I think it's really representative of a reflection for the state going forward.
Are we doing okay? Like, or what are the biggest challenges that we face that you guys identified in the report?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think that one of the real reasons of doing the blueprint work is to remind everybody in Texas that although there is this idea that we are a frontier state, 9 in 10 of us live in Texas metropolitan areas. So we are by definition one of the most urban states in the country. And frankly, have we have many of the fastest growing cities in the state of Texas. We face, like lots of places, challenges as it relates to our growth and how we manage growth in terms of our housing affordability. Not too long ago, we thought of housing affordability as an advantage for our state. 7 in 10 Texans now, according to a Lyceum poll, suggest that now it's a concern for us. But I think some of the issues that if I was to go through the blueprint and kind of raise some of the issues that come up in terms of kind of key things, amongst, interestingly enough, both leaders on the left and right and public, I think there's concern about preemption. I think the idea that Texas has been a place where we have really innovated at the local level. Things that happen here in Houston are different than Austin and different in San Antonio. And there's, I think, concern amongst leaders about, are we losing some of that creativity when we get to a top-down approach? The ideas of just having to be smart about how we think about our infrastructure going forward and what's needed to support that infrastructure. Both on the physicality and the digital side, but also the human side. There's a need to think about how we are making sure our residents are really skilled for the future. And then thirdly, I think when you look at our state, because we are so diverse in nature, we are a really good testing ground for lots of issues that the country will face: climate change, energy transition, technology, AI. And one of the things we call for in the blueprint is to be smart about policy, to embrace those challenges, to further economic development interests rather than sort of shying away from them.
So, excuse me. So go through, each of y'all had, sort of special, like y'all were each tasked with certain aspects of the report, kind of like run through kind of like what y'all found and kind of what challenges we face and what needs to be done to address those challenges.
Well, there were certainly some, I think, common themes and threads. And one of them, for instance, dealing with infrastructure would be electricity. This is not a surprise to anyone in Texas that we have our own grid and issues with the grid. And that really permeates a lot of what we find as far as economic development, as far as infrastructure, and also as far as artificial intelligence, not just electricity, but also water, our natural resources. So we know that water is a big issue. There was funding in the last session of the legislature, and it is a major issue this session, as it should be. Electricity and the grid continue to be issues. And as I said, this is an issue for economic development, for residents, for the cost of living, and again, for data centers, those data centers that are powering artificial intelligence and crypto. They use a lot of electricity, and they use a lot of water.
Pablo.
those are excellent points. One issue that we try to tackle, I mean, it's like in the blueprint, saying Texas faces challenges associated with its growth, right? Population growth, I mean, but also the impact from, I mean, numerous natural disasters that different regions face in different ways. And we're going to discuss this later on, I believe, right? But what we try to do is saying, what are the potential solutions that where we can innovate and put resources and investment so that we take those challenges as opportunity, right? I mean, it's like, and that's key because the strain in the state's infrastructure, as Sherry just mentioned, are huge. Right? I mean, it's like we talked about electricity. I mean, it's like the resiliency of the grid. I mean, and so on. And some of those challenges have to be taken on at the state level. But many of the challenges that we face, transportation, for instance, are more of a local issue. And same with housing, I mean, and so on. But one of the key elements that we say is that we have to align these programs into pushing for continuous growth. I mean, it's like, and being able to incorporate the people moving into Texas, but also, I mean, it's like being born and finding a solution in Texas. And we put a lot of emphasis on human capital development. And that for us is key because Texas has been, I mean, it's like at the forefront of the, I mean, it's like a transition to a sustainable energy future, right? I mean, it's like the main, I mean, it's like a producer of renewables in terms of wind and solar electricity. And there was a lot of support for that industry to be launched, right? The new challenge in electricity and energy production and so on comes probably from hydrogen, right? I mean, it's like, and so, and there's going to be more demand because Texas is also at the forefront of, I mean, it's like the modern industrial and manufacturing complex that's coming to town. So those are the areas where we see their infrastructure. We can, I mean, it's like constraints, the grid, I mean, it's like transportation, I mean, it's like development of human capital. Let's think about those as opportunities. Let's look at what can be done at the state level. And let's also unleash, I mean, it's like the local governments so they can collaborate and learn from each other to develop solutions that are specific to their own communities.
So one of the things that to Pablo's point about human capital, it's an important point as it relates to economic development. So a few weeks back, if you guys remember, the governor gave his State of the State address, and one of the things that he led with in the State of State address was the need to invest in Texas workforce. And one of the things that we call for in the blueprint is to really think about the role of workforce development as economic development. If you think about our approach to workforce development today in the state of Texas, we have really invested in our community college system. We are thinking about the role of institutions like the University of Houston and others. But when you look at our Texas Workforce Commission, for instance, there is a need to reimagine how we better link the work that institution does with economic development, so the connection to. And in fact, if you look at our work, what the governor called for, and recently even, if you want to be a nerd like me and look at the State of the Texas Economic Development Report, was just released a couple weeks ago, there is this call to say, for the first time in a long time, we are doing a decent job of attracting firms here, right? We're winning a lot of the great big sort of corporate relocations and fights as it relates to that. But the challenge with that is that we're not able to make sure that we're connecting Texans back to those jobs. And unless we're able to provide the right type of workforce development around those issues, then it's almost a not for loss, right? I mean, we have to really get to this idea, like a lot of states, is that economic development, the old way of thinking about economic development was about corporate relocation. Today's economic development is about investing in workforce. Workforce is economic development. And so I think, and you can see that both in the blueprint, but also with the work that Sherry led around AI and technology as well.
Exactly. And picking up on that, it's about people. When we talk about attracting industry, when we talk about our own workforce, people who live here, of course, they need a place to live. And that gets back to housing affordability and affordable housing. And at the local level, it is important to innovate at the local level, whether we're talking about housing or, in fact, training. And when we look at our people and our workforce, we're in another industrial revolution now with AI, with artificial intelligence. And we need to, as I say, mind the gap. There are people who are in jobs now that will change, that will no longer be there. There are people in skilled trades that could have augmentation for their jobs. There are people who are in coding who perhaps need to move into something where they're in more analytical roles. And so looking at the state as a whole, I think we really need to align our education system. And this goes from K through 12, to our community colleges, to our workforce and skills centers, to our technical colleges, and to our universities. There needs to be this alignment when we talk about work and what we see in the future and the skills that we need in our homegrown workforce.
Building on that point, I think one of the opportunities that we have around workforce development is that our state is seeing major investments in transportation and in infrastructure. One of the things that I'm super proud of is some of the work that we've done in Austin, Texas with Mayor Watson and the council there and the workforce board is to think about, as we're making these large capital investments across our state, how do you align that with workforce development opportunities? And so some of the work, an example of that idea of kind of reimagining what workforce is this idea of what we're doing with the Austin Infrastructure Academy, which is saying there's lots of investment that are coming down the pike. New roadways, there's opportunity for entrepreneurship in terms of business formation. There's the need to think about what are the technology skills that will be needed to operate new infrastructure in the state. And let's really dive deep with our industry partners to think about what that means in terms of workforce development. So I say that as an example because there is this need, and I think one of the things we heard in the blueprint work as we went through this idea of wanting to understand what does the economic development future of Texas look like, this idea of needing to come back and connect back to really to what industry needs in terms of those skill sets is super important, and something that I don't know that we're doing enough of here in the state of Texas.
Pablo, you look like you have something to say.
No, I was going to add an element. It's like, how do we tackle these issues, right? Because what we're trying to figure out is how communities can connect resources, right, to goals and missions, right? It's like, and so one of the sections of the report talks, it's like about how we can use AI. It's like for modernizing governance, right? It's like at the state and local level, and that to me is very important because what we want to look at is how do we find opportunities to reaching, right? What Stephen was saying, right? Firms need, it's like talented and trained workforce, right? It's like, and there's often a mismatch between the demands and supply for those, but some of those resources might be out there and we don't see them. And this is an opportunity for incorporating, it's like technology and AI into bridging those gaps, right?
Yes, it is. And we're already seeing that AI is being used and has been used for many years. It's just that people were not aware of it until, Chat GPT entered the stage, right? But it's actually been around for many years. And now what we're looking at is how can it assist us? So for instance, rather than having people spend their valuable time and brain power on Excel spreadsheets, can AI do that? And they can be analyzing. But to get back to the local level and the workforce and how the state can help, I really do see this need to bridge. So for instance, one of the projects that I'm involved with at University of Texas at Austin, we are working with the City of Austin, Austin Community College, and the AFL-CIO to see how we could augment workers in the skilled trades. We don't have enough people in these middle skilled jobs in the skilled trades. The plumbers, the pipe fitters, so on and so forth. So how can we use AI to help with their training? Think of welders. Austin Community College has a big welding program, and we've been working with them for several years to augment their training and to make their jobs safer.
You're talking about fixing or helping to alleviate sort of the shortage in construction, which
Yes, certainly this would help with construction because we know that all of the skilled trades are needed in construction. Again, whether it's your pipe fitters, your welders, your plumbers, yes.
To that, and there's not enough bodies and there's not enough humans to do the work that's needed, particularly like when you look at the infrastructure investment. Just to give you an example, we did an analysis looking at all of the dollars that are going to come into the Austin metropolitan area. Not to spend time talking so much about Austin, but to build the new airport, the airport expansion, to think about the redevelopment of I-35, which is coming down the pike, in addition to Tesla and the Samsung facility, which we can't forget out in Taylor, Texas. For the next 20 years, that metropolitan area will have to have about 10,000 construction workers every year to complete those jobs. There's just not enough bodies. Even if you attract those people, where do you put them in terms of housing? So to Sherry's point, the idea of thinking about how we not just train our workers, but thinking about how we augment that with technology is going to be central to being able to manage the growth that we need on the human capital side.
And this is an issue statewide. We have known this for years. It's been increasing over the past decade, whether you look at Houston area, DFW, San Antonio, all over the state. We know that we do not have enough of these skilled tradespeople to fulfill the jobs that are coming. And we do need to get back to housing, because this issue of housing affordability, used to think of this as only being an issue in the major urban areas. Then maybe it was the suburbs, then the exurbs. Now it's the rural areas. It's statewide.
So who is, right now the Texas legislature is meeting, who has the responsibility for setting the agenda here? What should the state be doing to sort of help cities deal with these matters, and how much of this should be left to the locals?
I'm gonna jump in here. So I think that politics is getting in the way of identifying these opportunities, because the problems we have identified, and it's like cut across. I mean, it's like communities, right? It's like socioeconomic status. Every single dimension faces challenges, right? I mean, it's like, and so when we think about setting the agenda here, we tend to think about a top-down approach, right? Where, I mean, the state determines, I mean, it's like what can and cannot be done at the local level. And believe me, I mean, it's like I'm a firm believer that some issues need to be, I mean, it's like addressed at a more centralized level, because it creates economies of scale, because it addresses issues that touch upon different communities. And we looked into those, like workforce development is one. I mean, right? Childcare, I mean, it's like is another one. I mean, it's like, and there's a big mismatch. I mean, because even firms are losing on people. I mean, it's like, right, not showing up to work because they don't have childcare, or not offering their services because they cannot afford. I mean, it's like sending their kids to a childcare facility, and pre-K and so on. Same for infrastructure and the grid and so on. Those are central issues that we might need to take at a more centralized level. But one of the points we were to underscore in this, and we see it because each of us is working with our local communities on different dimensions, unleash the local. I mean, it's like opportunities, right? So things that might matter, for instance, for the third ward or the unincorporated areas of Houston, right? Where we find that there's the largest number, right? I mean, it's like across the whole of Houston, right? Of people who are self-employed, and the lowest level of incorporation, right? I mean, it's like, so those individuals are working in jobs, right? Where they don't take advantage of having a bank account or accessing resources and support, right? And that's specific to that community. The state of Texas is not going to deal with those issues, right? But we need the opportunity, right? I mean, it's like of avoiding preemption, right? So we can explore, right? I mean, it's like with the issues that we as different communities think are central to us. So the two different levels here. The state tackle the issues that cut across the grid and resiliency, access to water. I mean, it's like enhanced opportunities for affordable housing and so on, workforce development. Different communities have different issues with transportation. I mean, it's like, and even with electricity, microgrids might be a great solution for some areas, but not others, right? So that's key to me.
Well, yes, we're a vast state, and we know that innovation and entrepreneurship at the grassroots, at the community level, at the local level, are so very important. If you look at the number of businesses now that are not needing venture capital, right? They're starting off with $50,000, $100,000. They're entrepreneurs, and they're becoming quite successful and quite wealthy. So we have seen this renaissance of entrepreneurship and innovation and creativity at the local level. And when we look at issues such as housing, for instance, certainly we, again, have many differences across the state. What can the state do? I think we're fortunate in that issues that we're seeing, such as water, electricity, housing, looking at artificial intelligence, that you're seeing a lot of bipartisan interest in them. And the issue then becomes, what can the state do to incentivize? What can the state do for funding, for capital, for making sure that the state's workforce guidelines, that the state's housing guidelines for affordable housing are aligned with the needs then that will allow these communities and cities to innovate?
So simply put, y'all, we're not built to have a top-down approach in the state of Texas. We're just not. I mean, when you look at housing, the issues around housing, for instance, the state of Texas itself did not do a housing study until like a year and a half ago when it had the comptroller's office do some look at how housing affordability was happening across the state of Texas. We don't have the capacity at the state level, and frankly, a lot of the intellectual capacity to do the innovative work that we need to do around housing, for instance, is at the local level. It's where the expertise is here. So one of the things that we have to think through is, I think Sherry's point is exactly right, and we heard this in our focus groups over and over. And in fact, we had this debate back and forth amongst the group, was you can't eat your cake and have it too, meaning you can't ask for local control and no local control in some issues. You gotta, there's some sense of principle here. And one of the things I think we came back to, and you can read the report, is what's made us a really interesting place, what has powered 26 metropolitan areas across the country, across the state, has been our effectiveness at the local level. So let's give the local communities the power to innovate. Let's incentivize them. Let's don't mandate. Let's think about the incentivization to make those policy changes. Let's provide them with the tools that are needed to think about how they provide the types of grants and resources to do those to do the changes that are needed at the local level. That's work. I think that has been traditionally it's work for Texas, and more importantly, it's inherently consistent with our ethos, which is we are always been a state that has thought about representation of government at the closest local level. And again, Houston has a very, very different faces very different housing challenges than Wichita Falls, for instance. And so let's empower our local officials to make those changes and make the policy updates that are needed.
You guys keep saying housing, which is a particular obsession of mine, and we have a whole housing panel that's going to come after this, so I'm really tempted to try to not make this a housing panel, but like we keep talking about it, so let's talk about it. So obviously we have a gigantic housing crisis in this state. We talk, this is an interesting area where you have some cities like Austin that are making big sort of bold moves to try to tackle their housing crises. They're building a ton of housing. And then you have other...
moved the needle. And it's moved the needle.
Right, and rents are going down.
And development, just number of housing units has really been pointed out as one of the highest in the nation.
Right, and so you have communities like that. Then you have other places that are not moving as quickly. Their housing costs are still moving up. They're not going up as fast as they were, but they're still very high. What is the role that cities should continue to play on the housing front? And what do you do when cities, perhaps because they are afraid of angering, homeowners, or, are scared of whiplash from basically anti-development backlash? What is the role of the state there?
Can I interject here? So we talked about housing affordability, right? It's and housing, and so we have to look at housing constraints, right? And they fall across the whole spectrum. Of housing, right? You can think about going from shelters, right? Through market rate housing, right? And they all place different constraints on different segments of our population. So the role of the state and the cities are going to be different for different types of housing constraints, right? So it's clear that shelters, the market is not going to take care of those, right? Low-income housing, you need a strong government intervention. With subsidies and for those houses to be paid for because the people cannot afford them, right? They're being constrained. Then you start moving into workforce housing, or and then moving all the way from workforce to market rate housing. And then you can start seeing that there are opportunities for mixing private and public, right? Creating strike funds that allow, for instance, for the newly occurring affordable housing units to be preserved for affordable housing. Thinking about what happens after the incentives we provided for building affordable housing go away. It's like, how do we keep that stock of housing? It's like for individuals not to be housing constrained, right? And that housing constraint is not just ownership, it's renters, right? So it's very important to understand this. It's like the key here is that housing becomes important for many members of our community because it's a big source of our savings, right? So for 90% of the individuals, their main financial assets when they're owners is their home, right? But you can create equity and financial savings, right? Even as you rent. So the thing here, if we have to identify how we promote, it's like whatever you get as being an owner from being a renter and providing more opportunities for that. And the second part is like we need to build like crazy. But where we build also matters, right? Because building in some areas puts a stronger strain in our, in our government resources and community resources to build the infrastructure that's needed if you start moving out in areas that are suburban or exurban or whatever you want to call them, right? Then densifying, as Austin did, might be an opportunity. It's not the same for everywhere, right? Some smaller towns don't have that issue. Some of the metro areas don't have that issue of going back into the center of the cities, right? So that's kind of the idea here. Look across the spectrum.
So, right, there's a continuum when you talk about housing, starting, as you said, at one end with people who are living unsheltered on the streets, all the way to situations where we see where you have people who could afford to live in a more expensive, larger home, whether it's renting or owning. However, the supply's not there. And so this is something else that we're seeing in our communities. So they are staying in those homes. And that means that people who are looking, for instance, for starter homes, whether they're renting or owning, don't have a home to go into. So whether you're looking at people who are unsheltered, whether you're looking at very low income, where yes, you do need to subsidize. And I think this is an important point, that how do we incentivize? How can we look at case studies across the country where we've seen success and then, use those as models? And I think that, that there are those at the state level who can do that, who can say, here's a way we could use our state resources better to incentivize. Here's a way that we could look at case studies across the country and use them and try to incentivize these as models in our different communities. They're not all the same. Here's a way that we can look at land that, for instance, the state has that perhaps could be available to build on, and we could contribute that. So there are many different ways in which I think that local communities can learn from each other across the state of Texas and across the country, and ways in which the state can help to incentivize, right, whether it's through supplying knowledge or skilled workers or land, or making better use of the subsidies. I could get really in the weeds, but there are some regulations, let's just say at the state level, that maybe if they were changed would allow for more supply in some of the housing. We talk about, for instance, missing middle. And what you have, again, is a big gap. You have people who, we don't have enough subsidized housing. And when we're developing, particularly in these inner city areas where we have transportation and it becomes very desirable, you're going to have to subsidize some units too so people can stay there. You also need to look at people who are in the workforce who can't afford housing. How can we build that type of housing that will fit into a neighborhood? It's done all over the country. And so we need to look to those models, we need to incentivize them, and look at each community and which model or models fit with those communities.
I think we've hit housing pretty good.
Are you sure? But what's interesting right now is that, obviously, like the state for the last decade or so, Republican lawmakers have really gone on this, they've really been on this crusade to sort of like rein in the locals who they see as, too progressive, insufficiently conservative, what have you, right? And one thing that they're considering this year is to preempt certain like local land use regulations. There are bills in the legislature that would address cities' minimum lot size requirements that would basically intend to make it easier to build an accessory dwelling unit or convert a strip mall that has seen better days into, housing or a downtown office building. Exactly. So is that considering the scale of the housing crisis and the depth and the width of it, is that not an interest of the state to say, look, we know that these are the kinds of regulations you pass or the kinds of things that you pass if you want to, get out of the way and let there be more housing supply? Is that not an interest for the state to be doing? How should the legislature be thinking about those questions?
Look, I'm a local control guy. I mean, at the end of the day, there's folks that know me really, really well know, and we've talked about this, and not that folks agree with me on all of these issues, but minimum lot sizes and the way we approach that in Austin, Texas does not work for El Paso or Wichita Falls. It just does not. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. We're a very diverse state. And frankly, our leadership in our communities, the way we think about community engagement is very, very different. And so I think there is a way to address this crisis, and we can incentivize or we can mandate. And one of the things that I truly believe, if we want to be talking about the thing the state should be doing, it's all the things that Sherry just talked about. Let's incentivize. Let's create the funds to do all of the affordable housing stuff, all of the really creative affordable housing stuff that has to happen. There are a lot more people that are much more smarter in those issues than me. But it is this idea that I think we are so caught up in this idea of the argument of, what we hear from the NIMBYs or the YIMBYs or whatever the MBs they are, that we lose sight of the idea that part of the housing opportunity, the challenge that we face, is in that deeply affordable housing piece. It is the workforce housing piece. And that's probably that is a place, Sherry knows more about this and Pablo knows more about this than me. I'm just an economic development dude. That is the place that the state could play more, I think, and do more and be more innovative and be more creative. Let's also be very, very clear. Every time we talk about addressing affordable housing or the housing crisis in Texas, we always come back to property taxes. It's always property taxes.
No, don't I know it?
What's that?
I've just covered property taxes for,
it's always
like 3 or 4 years now.
And to Pablo's point earlier, one of the things that we in places like Houston and Austin, where some 50% of our residents are renters. They're renters. Property taxes is a trickle-down effect for them. It's great for me, as a property owner, but we're not doing anything in the rental space and rental protections and all those types of things. And so, to me, I think that's where we can play a better role.
And that's exactly right. We know that when property taxes increase, you as a renter pay more rent. When property taxes decrease, does your rent go down? It's a market issue as to whether rents increase or decrease, not we're going to pass down property taxes. And again, getting back to the need to subsidize, yes, as we're developing in these areas, and this is where the state can play more of a role with funding, with changing some regulations, with having some incentives, is in subsidizing some home ownership, but mainly rental units in areas where we can have mixed use, we can have different incomes, but you're going to have to subsidize some of it. There's no getting around that.
So one of the points that we teach in our policy analysis class is what's the issue we want to resolve. Right? And sometimes we mix stuff up, and it becomes an insurmountable problem, right? But the key here is what are the hurdles? It's like building. If people come to Texas, right, land is a scarce resource, right? So the prices, it's like of wherever you build are gonna go up. Right? It might be going faster in urban areas, and and less fast in rural areas, but still, there's gonna be more demand for space, right? And so that's one of the key elements. And the space constraints are gonna be very different from different cities, right? Some are more, some are denser, some are more, like large sprawls, right? They create their own problems. But once you, have these dense or sprawl, the solutions to the problems are different, because maybe you continue with the sprawl and you have to build infrastructure for that, right? So you have to build the roads, right? It's like, and provide for water and electricity access, right? It's like for people working from home, you have to have internet access, right? So these issues are very different for different areas, right? So I would rather have the state and the federal government looking up at what they can do from a centralized fashion, as opposed to saying, it's like, this is how you have to build in El Paso, in San Antonio, or in Houston, right? Let the communities decide how it works out. I mean, it's like, and the framework we put together here is like, well, you have different elements, right? You have the market, right? Demand and supply for housing. Where the market does not deliver, then you have to find solutions. You have the built infrastructure, which is also key to housing, right? Houses are connected, I mean, it's like to the rest of the community, right? Through roads, I mean, it's like through demand for services and so on. Schooling, I mean, it's another big issue, right? We have the political, I mean, it's like, and legal infrastructure that we have to consider here. And then the interaction of all those issues, right?
Well, and location is, as we know, location, very important. But it's also an alignment issue, because you have a situation where people will say, well, I'm going to move out into an exurb because housing is more affordable. Now you're going to have to commute into a job. Do you have a vehicle that's sufficient for that? Are you sharing a vehicle with your neighbor? Is there transportation there? Is there health care there? Are there grocery stores there? So another is alignment of the things that we need to make life work, to make our communities work, and to make our state work.
One positive note on this, I mean, it's like, so we didn't speak about homelessness, right? But Texas, I mean, cities have done a great job, I mean, with homelessness, right? I mean, again, if Houston reduces homelessness by 30,000 people, it's going to have an impact across Texas, right? Numbers-wise, right? But there is a place where the local governments tended to get things right, I mean, right? I mean, they are addressing the symptom, not the base of the problem, right? I mean, it's like what causes homelessness and how we deal with that. But they have done a pretty good job of that. I mean, and that's part of the housing issue here.
Right. And piggybacking off of that, you know, y'all all had different areas of responsibility for the report. If y'all haven't read it, I suggest that you do. It's 35 pages with notes. I was even able to read it. So tell me a little bit about, you know, piggybacking off of the homelessness aspect, you know, tell me some places that y'all think are getting it right for your specialties, things that you saw during the report that you thought were promising.
I'll go first. So I'm an economic development guy. One of the things that amazes me is actually happening here in Houston, Texas. And it is around the way that we are thinking about the global challenges that we face and how we're building economic development opportunities around that. So we all know that we are setting in Houston, Texas, the energy capital of the world. And one of the things that you have to applaud local leaders for doing here in Houston is to say, we understand that the world is going through energy transition. And unless we want Houston to be Detroit and not innovate and fall further and further behind, then we are going to put our head in the sands and not realize that energy transition is happening. The Greater Houston Partnership here has a really terrific organization that's initiative that's done a lot around energy transition and is really leading in that space. All the things that Pablo's talked about, hydrogen, thinking about new technologies, supporting startups that are supporting that space. And by the way, that's not just all green energy. Those are a lot of your traditional energy companies that are leading those efforts and funding those efforts. And that's even pushing up through the Permian Basin. And so one of the great things about that is you've got private sector leadership at the local level that said, let's embrace a challenge and really innovate on that. And so, you know, from an economic development standpoint, they've done everything right, or they're doing a lot of the things right. They're thinking about the policy. They're thinking about really interesting workforce development initiatives. They're incubating small companies. They're getting their large anchor institutions to think about what is needed in the future. Oh, by the way, the only thing they really need is for the politics of Texas to not get in the way of that, which is to say, let's embrace the energy transition. We are the energy state. We don't know what energy will look like in the future. We kind of know what it will look like, but let's really wrap our hands around that and say that it's not just about doing things the old way, but it's about looking towards the future. And I think you have to look, you know, say that Houston is a real terrific example of that. There's other examples. San Antonio with cyberspace. You can look at El Paso with healthcare and aerospace. There's lots of really great examples about that. But again, it comes back to the same thing that I'll come back to, and that is local leaders in concert with public and private leaders together. One of the things that has always made our state really, I'll never forget that. So I was doing some work a couple years back for the mayor here in Houston, and we were looking at trying to understand the ecosystem here. And we were interviewing an entrepreneur from Boston that had just moved to Houston. And one of the things that the comment that she made with me struck me, because I've spent many years in Boston. I'm a Bostonian. I lived in Boston for nearly a decade. And she says, one of the great things about being here in Texas is that the public and private have a seat at the table together at the local level. Sometimes in other places, that's not the case. And so one of the things we want to remember is getting back to this idea that we are this interesting place of public and private. You very much see that in the economic development space.
So I'll follow up on that. I mean, it's related to energy, but Chapter 313 from the Texas Economic Development Act, which phase into the Jobs, Energy, Technology, and Innovation Act of 2024, did a terrific job at allowing, the Texas energy space to diversify. I mean, it's like the development of solar and wind are a consequence of those initiatives and incentives, right? Where the state supported that. And the new one, I mean, it's like both from the federal government and the state government, right? The CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. The energy companies in Texas, I mean, it's like your traditional, I mean, those based on fossil fuels and hydrocarbons, I mean, it's like took advantage of that. And the motto has become, and this is something we do a lot through UH Energy at UH Energy, the University of Energy, I mean, it's like umbrella organization, is that the motto for Texas is not what the source of energy is, right? It's the emissions, right? And so the point that these companies have embraced these opportunities is see, okay, let's take on the praise of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, right? So we know that fossil fuels will still remain an important source of energy, right? But we want to minimize its impact. I mean, it's like, right? I mean, it's like on environmental conditions and so on. But even the neighboring communities, right, that have to suffer the emissions from, I mean, it's like the hydrocarbon producing, I mean, it's like fuel producing facilities. So that's one dimension, and there's a lot of innovation there going on. The other big innovation is with hydrogen. We have tons of natural gas, right? So, I mean, we're not gonna go for green hydrogen, but we can go for blue hydrogen, right? And if we connect that, I mean, which is what companies are doing now, taking advantage of these funding opportunities, right? With, I mean, carbon capture, for instance, then you get the best of both worlds, because we do think that energy is the, hydrogen is the source of energy of the future, right? So those to me are very important areas, right? Now, there's a lot of coordination missing here, right? So wind and solar come from some parts of the state. I mean, solar you can have it almost everywhere. You need to connect them to the grid, right? Grid, which is quite obsolete. It was built like 150 years ago for a very different, I mean, it's like energy producing environment.
Well, I have lived in Texas for quite a long time, and I've also worked, now that I think about it, in the private sector, the public sector, both as staff and an elected official, the nonprofit and the academic. And what I have seen, and we can do a really good job of this in Texas, is that when all sectors work together, we do our best work for the people of Texas. And it's about, I think, being goal-oriented and then sharing those goals, having mutual goals, working towards those goals, all sectors together, and looking at how we combine our finances, too, towards those goals. So Houston, Texas has done a great job with that when we look at homelessness. The city of Houston and the leaders in Houston and all the sectors said, let's get together. We have a goal. We want to the best of our ability, and you'll never be 100%, but eliminate homelessness. How do we do that? How do we get everybody at the table, and how do we pool and align our resources? And Houston did that, and it's been a real model. In housing, Austin, as we mentioned, has done a lot to look at what are the needs in Austin, and how do we get everybody at the table, How do we align our finances? How do we look at barriers and opportunities, whether it's eliminating parking or having more subsidies or incentivizing developers, and actually produce more housing? So those are two examples that I would point to. When it comes to artificial intelligence in cities, I know that we're going to be discussing that in a little while.
We've got about, I don't know, about three or 4 minutes until we open it up for Q&A. But real quick, obviously there's been a lot of sort of tumult at the federal level. What do you guys sort of expect when you're looking at the recommendations in this report? What is the role that the federal government should play, and how would you expect the Trump administration to play a role in any of these areas?
I'll go first. So I think one of the things that concerns me about the current federal administration, and I have an op-ed that I've pitched to the New York Times about this, so hopefully they're going to run it, is we've heard a lot about the idea of what's happening with the federal government in terms of employment and the idea of the decline of employment in our federal workforce. And as someone at a policy school, I know Sherry and Pablo believe this. This is an issue. There is a real concern about the future of what public service looks like. But the thing that really worries me, even beyond just the implications of what it means for employment, is that from an economic development standpoint, one of the things to really remember is that the federal government has always been a key accelerator of innovation from a federal dollar standpoint. There's great studies about this. There's a study from the Federal Reserve. Moretti's done work on this before that says that one of the things that the federal government does is accelerate through research R&D dollars, monies that can be transformational to the way that we build the economies of the future. And there's great examples of that all over the country. And there's great examples of that all over the state of Texas as well. Look at the role of our research institutions. Look at how health sciences has created a whole new wave of innovation out in El Paso, for instance. And then with the Biden administration, we saw a double down on that. There was a doubling down on place-based economics, right? Bipartisanly, by the way. The IRA, the CHIPS Act, the EDA tech hubs. And the thing that worries me the most is the federal government turning the spigot off of those dollars. You already see the federal administration calling for a pause on the IRA. Done. You've seen a review of the EDA tech hubs. By the way, tech hubs, it wasn't about the dollars. It was about getting the public and private sector together to be innovative. And then last night, and this should be very worrisome for Texans, by the way, President Trump called for the elimination of the CHIPS Act. He called for the administration to eliminate the CHIPS Act. Why is that worrisome for us as Texans? Because we as a state have doubled down on that. There is a state fund that we've created around the CHIPS Act to match federal dollars. And so if those dollars are turned off, the idea of being a place that's going to innovate around what does technology look like, and the production of technology here in the state of Texas, like other places, is pretty worrisome, frankly.
That's a fabulous point. I mean, one of the things we know is that innovation has this public good flavor to it. I mean, it's like it's going to be under-delivered by the market. I mean, we need that support so people are willing to make bets on things that might fail in the hope that we'll find the things that work. I mean, it's like, and the market is not good at doing that because, I mean, they need to make the money for what they put as an investment, right? So that's a key element here. We don't want to waste the money, right? We make it, it's like spread the way that it delivers the most, right? But we have to be willing to make those bets, and that's a big role. But one that really worries me, especially, from a Houston perspective, but also, the whole, border, area and Texas being a bordering state is trade. It's like, we made lots of efforts over 60 years to build a trade infrastructure global, with global reach, right? To try to increase opportunities for firms and individuals to find jobs and get access to products and innovation and so on. Our economy is highly integrated, and it's like the Texas economy with Mexico, but also with Canada, and through the ports with the rest of the world. And those headwinds on trade are going to have an impact. They may get resolved. I mean, it might be a bargaining chip. I mean, it's what one would hope that that's what's going to happen. But it's creating a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is felt in terms of reframing for making the necessary investments in those conditions. The second one to me is immigration. And you talk to individuals working in the construction business in Texas in particular, right? So without a flow of immigrants willing to work, I mean, it's like in construction, but also in farming and in other areas, I mean, it's like they face a bottleneck. And that's going to impact, I mean, it's like individuals, right? I mean, it's like when they're trying to buy a home, rent a home, or rebuild after a natural disaster, something that we're going to discuss later on. Those two issues, I mean, it's like our headwinds, I mean, for the Texas economy, for Houston in particular, with one of the largest ports in the nation and a big source of the exporting industry in the country.
Yes, and my colleagues have mentioned certainly important points. We know that those federal dollars have been an innovation engine, whether it's the National Science Foundation or in Health and Human Services. We've already talked about how we don't have enough workers, whether it's in farming or skilled trades. And by the way, we need to look at what's happening with the birth rate too when we look at all this in context. So an issue that I will put out there in more of a global sense is unpredictability, right? There are certain issues in society where the market can't produce. But we as a society have valued them, and we have called them public goods. We think they're in the public interest. The market can't sustain them, whether it's been in transportation or in housing or in education. I have a concern as to what is the thinking as to what are public goods, right, in this country? What are they? How will we fund them? And then this level of, as I said, unpredictability, right, which is difficult in every sector, right, and in the economy overall.
And I think it's time for audience Q&A.
Absolutely. And for those both here in person and online throughout the day, we have some cards in the back, QR code you can use, but online it's texastribune.org/ask. We have some questions here for the panel. Realizing too that we'll offer, we have a number of our speakers for panels later in the day who are here. You all will be able to answer some of those, and it may tee up and help our panelists know what are on people's minds. This person asks about the role of remote work within economic development, decline, increase, and effect on demand for housing and transit.
The rise of remote work. Look, I mean, one of the things that we know about rise of the remote, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty about the rise of remote, right? The question is what's going to happen? Will we see a call back to the office? There's been implications of what it means for our commercial real estate opportunities. On the flip side of that, for a lot of second and small tier cities across the state, it's been a win in terms of a talent attraction issues. You know, I think it's a TBD, not to punt the ball, so to speak, but if I was making a prediction on, what happens with remote work, a lot of it's going to be interesting to see what happens with some of our major employers. Do we see a callback? We're already seeing some of that callback. What are the implications for that? I think the thing that I worry about in terms of implications of remote work is that a lot of folks bet on remote work. And so to Pablo's point earlier, they made housing decisions or location decisions that were on the peripheral. And because they've made decisions on the peripheral, now if you're asking people to come back to work, and that creates lots of significant issues from an infrastructure standpoint, a climate issue, all those types of things. And so I think those are, in my sense, it's not so much the economic, there is the economic development piece, very much so for CB districts and local governments, but there is, from a livability standpoint, I think there's big issues, big eyes.
Excuse me, this person thanks you all for the important discussion and asks, can you please drill down on the identified impacts on college students as they grapple with recent uncertainty about the Department of Education, federal aid, housing, food, et cetera?
Certainly, and there is a lot of discussion now too about what are the skills that students will need, and I think that this is an important response to your question, because the skills that they have are going to determine their opportunities and the opportunity to be employed, to have a quality of life, to have housing. There is no doubt that there are changes in the skills and aptitudes that students will need. And I think that what is really important is that students have critical thinking skills, that they be able to identify and analyze and think critically at a higher level about problems, that they be creative, that they have imagination, that they are flexible and adaptable, that they have innovative spirit and an entrepreneurial spirit, and that there are attributes that are human and that will remain human, such as empathy and leadership, that are very important. So as we're talking about this new industrial revolution that we're in, technology, artificial intelligence, it's important to think about those attributes that are human, that remain human, right, and that are important in the workforce. So those are certainly some of the issues that I'm discussing with my students and others.
We know we have Caroline Mays here from TxDOT to join us later on in the day, but this person asks, how can the state and TxDOT help with mobility issues? TxDOT does not fund transit, which is critically needed in urban areas, and state officials have blocked transit projects in San Antonio and Austin.
I just want to say real quick that I wanted to take the Metro Rail line here from the hotel, but my boss wanted to take a lift, so.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is a cat and mouse situation, right? You tend to build, more highways, and those highways tend to be crowded. It's like increases traffic, that increases demand. So I think we have to start looking at the transportation issue from a different perspective, and that means that maybe a higher reliance on public transportation in some areas would work better. Right? It's like interconnecting different forms of transportation, right? That minimizes the impact. It's like that we have on the street, that makes our commutes shorter and so on, right? With park and ride spaces, right? With more flexible public transportation, right? And those conditions. The key issue here is that the local communities don't have enough resources, right, to go after. It's like the demand for roads in particular, and that's going to be a big issue for it's like Texas Department of Transportation moving forward.
And we have one last question here. Jacob from Houston asks, how significant is Apple investing in Houston?
You are the community.
It's huge. I think obviously it's a big investment opportunity. A lot of it will be the connection. Though when you win these large investments, right, the question always comes back is how invested are those folks back into the community, right? So you can win the investment. Yes, you can. Yes, it creates the ecosystem. Yes, it sets us up to be this innovative place. But when you have these types of investments, you have to look back to these companies and these organizations to ask, how much of a community player are they going to be? Are they going to work with us on workforce development? Are they going to be helping us think about how we can support a kind of a bit more inclusive innovation sector around us? So a lot of it comes back to this idea of how engaged they are. Is it a huge win for Houston? It's a huge win for Houston. Commercial innovation is super important for sure. So for but again, I think it comes back to this idea of connection and how do you connect the dots in an ecosystem to ensure that you're getting the biggest bang for the buck.
All right, with that, I thank Josh. I thank our panel so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
As our panel steps off the stage, I do have a few announcements here before we move on to our next program. And Josh, just have you take this for, no, it's okay. Chat with Nick. All right. So just a few things that I want to cover here before we get to our first lightning talk of the day. First, just a reminder for all of you that today's conversation is eligible for continuing professional education credits for Texas educators through the Association of Texas Professional Educators, and you can learn more using the QR code on screen or by visiting apte.org/Tribune. I also just want to thank all those around the state who have made the journalism of the Tribune, including events like this one, possible by becoming Texas Tribune members. To learn more and to become a member, visit texastribune.org/support. And Connor, you can come right up and as I'm just sharing this a little bit here, and my colleague Rob is getting the stage set for the next panel. But leading up to today's symposium, we wanted to gauge what was on Texans' minds as they think about their community in terms of both what gives them pride and motivates them to work to make it better. So throughout the day, as we jump back and forth with our conversations about policy and much needed action, we just want to share a little bit of what we heard. So as we are just about to jump into our lightning talk with Connor Kinney, I want to share some of the answers to the first question we asked, which was, what makes you proud of your city? Here were some of the answers. Its rich history, excellent parks, community arts, theater, orchestra, choirs, responsive city government, diversity. We heard diversity several times from those who responded. Good, strong community and safe schools, cheaper prices and less traffic. We have a new public library, making the impossible possible, attention to the environment, quietness, a small location, and people. Just some reflections from Texans around the state with that question about what makes you most proud of your city. So let's get to our first lightning talk of the day. Will be 15 minutes. Just so you know, Connor has some slides that he'll be able to show on both sides of the room here. Connor Kinney is a public affairs professional, civic volunteer, and affordable housing expert, currently serving as a principal at Capital A Housing. Before becoming a development consultant, Connor spent 2 decades working in politics and public policy in and around federal, state, and local government in Washington, D.C. and Austin. So we are honored to have Connor here for a 15-minute presentation.
All right, good morning, everybody. That bio is, we need to update it because we don't consult anymore. We actually just build. My name is Connor Kinney. I am an affordable housing developer based in Austin, but we go around the state as well. Who am I? We are developing or have built 575 units of affordable housing since starting about 4.5 years ago in Austin. If you're not familiar with the industry, that's a really good number. And we got there because we started it right after the city passed Affordability Unlocked, which is what the first half is what we're going to focus on. But then also right after the city passed its affordable housing bond, or another affordable housing bond, which is also a critical component. I do have a background in policy, government, and politics. My partners have a, I can't see. We'll do this. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so I'm the policy guy, and my partners are the civil engineering folks. This will be relevant later. And we specialize in partnering with local governments, nonprofits, and philanthropy to achieve their housing goals, not ours. So next slide. So to start off with, hot housing policies. So these are policies that are in the blueprint. These are bills that have been introduced in the legislature and look like they're going well. These are policy changes that cities around Texas are looking at adopting. The kind of big ticket ones that I've seen lately are minimum lot size maximums, so the maximum minimum you can set. Yes, in God's backyard, YIGBY, there's a bill in the legislature on that, which essentially says if you're a church looking to build affordable housing, you can go ahead and do it. It doesn't matter what your zoning says. And then the last is eliminating parking minimums. Next slide. So thing is we have more or less done all of these things several years ago through Austin's Affordability Unlocked ordinance. So we have a guinea pig to know what happens when you adopt these things. And let's talk about what happened. Next slide. So Austin's Affordability Unlocked, in exchange for some minimum affordability, it's about 60% of your area median income for rental, 80% for ownership over a period of 40 years, and that is half the units, and that's important to note. Half your units can be market rate. It's just half of your units that need to qualify. In exchange for that, on single-family units, lots, you can build 6 to 8 units, which effectively means you're getting that very small minimum lot size. Your setbacks are reduced 50%, your height is increased 50%, you have no cap on the number of units you can do, and you are exempt at the time from Austin's parking requirements and something that we call compatibility, which really was one of the strangleholds on building in Austin for a long time, which Councilmember Chito Vela helped lead the charge to do away with, and he'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide. So how did this work in practice? So these are all projects that we've built. So you may be able to see here that there's a new dark roof area. It shows 5 addresses, but it's actually 6. Those are 6 row homes on the exact same size lot next to it as there is a single family home with some project cars in the backyard. So by doing away with that minimum lot size effectively, we were able to build, next slide, this little project, which was 3 market rate homes and 3 affordable homes in District 4. Councilmember Vela. And so 3 of them are income restricted for actually 99 years for the ownership, and 3 of them are market rate. And we're able to get that done on about a 10,500 square foot lot. So this is what happens when you eliminate minimum lot sizes. Next slide. On the multifamily side, we were able to take lots that were effectively killed by the zoning regulations and actually do something on them. This lot was a really good example. This project makes me cry because we weren't able to close on all the funding for it, but it's a good example because this is in a TOD in Austin. There's a train station about a half a block away. You see a bunch of old industrial properties, an apartment complex there on the very end, but right at the top, you see there's some single family homes up there, and that meant that you effectively could not build new multifamily anywhere on the northern stretch of those lots due to compatibility. Just checking the time, good. And what we were able to do, because compatibility was taking away, what compatibility said is that back then, up to 540 feet away from the nearest single-family zoned lot or a single-family house, that the lot could have even been rezoned, and the city said, we want to build commercial or multifamily here. If there was still a single-family house on the lot, you were capped on what you could build up to 540 feet away. So it really just definitely kill development. If you have policies like that in your hometowns, please do away with them. They're terrible, terrible policies. So we had planned here a 5-story building, right, or 4-story in this case, right kind of on the northern edge there where the grass was. So at the time, this put us at an advantage because we could go out. The lots were priced for market rate developers. They'd see a lot of lots that were zoned as multifamily, zoned as commercial, zoned as mixed use, but they couldn't do anything with them because of compatibility, because of parking. So we were able to come in and for a little while, we're able to purchase some land on the cheap and make that work. But alas, that is no more. Next slide. City Council did the right thing, did away with parking minimums, severely constrained compatibility. So we say, killed by City Council there on the bottom, and up on the top we said City Council will help, because really what it was is by doing away with parking requirements and compatibility or severely reducing compatibility, those are basically like non-zoning items down on the bottom, and on the top those are zoning items. We have a very pro-housing City Council in Austin right now. For an affordable housing project, it's pretty reliable to get them to approve a rezoning. So City Council will help us get the zoning that we need. That takes care of the entitlements, and the non-zoning code changes are what changed on the bottom. This is a bummer for us. We are no longer at an advantage, but it was good for the city. Unambiguously, this was a good thing. It enables so much more infill development than we would otherwise not see. So I want to be clear on that. We go to the next slide. So is Austin a housing policy success story? Kind of. Austin has seen a 20% decrease in rents this year. I think we're down maybe like 25% over the last like 3 or 4 years. This is unambiguously because of the massive increase in housing supply in Austin. That being said, it is mostly very large apartment complexes, mostly on greenfield land, mostly on the periphery of the city. Not all, but mostly. The policies haven't been around long enough, and building in infill, whereas where we need to build to get served by rail, is still hard for economic reasons, and there are still also some policy changes. So we increased supply, that was great. It wasn't because we got rid of parking minimums, so that is going to help as we move into the forward. So we just want to be clear about that. And then the devil is in the details. There are still a lot of non-zoning code requirements that make development in the city of Austin, not unlike other places, quite difficult. Our site planning process takes about a year to plan out your parking lots and your stormwater and how you hook up to sewers and how you're hooking up to Austin Energy. The city has been trying to work on that with what we call site plan light that's coming up and a site plan exemption. Impact fees are killers. The revenue caps on cities imposed by the legislature are slowly strangling our cities, so I don't blame the cities for imposing those. But for example, I am looking at a $700,000 item right now to increase the size of the city's water pipe up to 4 blocks away for a 120-unit permanent supportive housing project that we're building for youth exiting foster care and the juvenile justice system. So we had to take out of a $32 million budget, there's about $700,000 of that the city's asking us to upgrade the water grid, right? Those costs really add up. Impervious cover is a third rail in Austin in many ways. Stormwater management, subdivision is still a huge pain. We have been able to address a lot of these due to our background. I have all these civil engineers working for me who do that hard part of development. And then my background in policy, and then city staff and city council have been enormously cooperative in affordable housing development. It's made a huge difference. It's still hard to build inside the city. Next slide. So the bottom line here is that code requirements, implementation, staff processes are a necessary part of being a pro-housing city. You can put affordability at locked in, you can change your zoning code, you can get rid of parking requirements. If you don't address the processes in the permitting, you're not going to get housing built. But the good news is that we're not California. And I've studied that a lot, and you wouldn't believe, or I wouldn't believe, the amount of approvals that you have to get through there. It is still relatively easy to build in most Texas cities compared to a lot of other places, which is why we're getting all their people and their economic growth. So I have a few minutes, and I just wanted to get on a bit of a soapbox about affordable housing funding, if we can go to the next slide. Multifamily development is in a very, very bad way nationwide right now. Construction costs have increased dramatically, like 30 to 50% in the last 5 years. Like it's mind-boggling how much costs have gone up. They're never coming back down. Construction costs are a one-way ratchet. Interest rates are high. They're never going to get back down to where we were in the zero interest rate environment. And then the chaos coming to materials and labor. I'm in the middle of bidding 2 projects right now, and we're getting murdered on what we're getting back from our subs. Most market rate projects in the United States for multifamily development are dead. The ones that were on people's desks 2-3 years ago that they were getting real excited about building are not getting built right now. If you look at the number of permitted, and not just permitted, but actual starts, they are like, I don't know the exact figures, but we are at a small fraction of what they were a couple of years ago, granted in a building boom, and affordable housing is getting hit with that too. Next slide. I got 5 minutes, all right. So I wanted to talk about sources of funding for housing. So if you look at these AMI levels, right, 30, 50, 60% of your area median income, that's mostly financed with LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits. 80% to 120%. There you can get a big break by using your housing finance corporations and your PFCs. Big controversy, still bills this year in Texas, certainly very much being abused. They can make projects pencil for that 80% AMI level. In my opinion, that's appropriate in some markets, not in all. It's a case-by-case basis. But I want everyone to know that the 30% AMI units at the very bottom of the income scale, which is generally where we have the tightest supply in Texas's cities, those unit for unit, typically lose money every year. On a typical affordable housing finance. You need vouchers coming in, you need a lot of other units that are higher in AMI. If you had an all 30% development and you didn't have other sources of income on it, that project would lose money, go bankrupt, and get seized by the bank. They don't work, so you need other sources of subsidy. Next slide. Low-income housing tax credits. 9% LIHTC credits. They're competitive, they're awesome. They pay 70% of your costs. They are fantastic if you can get them. They are highly, highly competitive in most metro areas. Why? They can pay for up to 70% of your project costs. That means you can have those 30% units, you can have those 50% units, or you can have a structured parking garage, or you can go up 5 stories, the things that add construction costs. If you're gonna be doing a project in an urban area and you don't have any other subsidies, 9% is the only way you're making it work. You can't make it work on 4%. And the bad news is there's only 93 million statewide that is awarded year by year to do those. So typically, for example, in Austin, it's 2, maybe 3 projects a year. 4% tax credits, not competitive. There's a lot more of them, up to $4 billion a year, although that gets wonky on exactly how that translates to subsidies. They only provide 30% of your project costs. Without an additional subsidy, that means you're pretty much limited to building like a 200-300 unit 3-story surface parked apartment complex that you were able to build on cheap land way out in the periphery of your city. We don't build those yet. I don't like building those. I don't think they're the kind of housing that we need. If you don't have external subsidies, that's all you can afford to build with a 4% tax credit. Next slide. So takeaways here are that gap financing. It was really needed before. Now with construction costs and interest rates, it's absolutely critical for all urban areas in Texas to be able to finance affordable housing. You can do it through bonds, you can use your CDBG money, you've got spare change in the couch, whatever you can throw at it, it's necessary, necessary, necessary. If you don't have a decent amount of supplemental funding, and we all used a lot of COVID funding over the last couple of years, and that was awesome, but it's all gone now. A city, if it doesn't have it, has to look at other sources of funding. One way you can do this is to provide the land for free. We work with a lot of local governments. Increasingly, we work with churches who have underutilized land or they're closing up shop. We have 2 projects with churches right now that are essentially donating the land for affordable housing. That knocks a couple of $1 million off our budget, and that can sometimes take the place of those additional subsidies beyond LIHTC. So one thing communities can do if they don't have those subsidies or if they don't have enough, do what I do. Go through the tax rolls. Find every single property that is held by every single entity associated with your city and county. Go see what's on there. You drive it out. You see if there's any development plans on it. You look at your facilities master plans. You go out and find the churches that, rumor is they might be closing up shop yet. Those pieces of property can be critical in making it work. We have those subsidies in Austin. I still need donated land to make a 4% project work in Austin. And those are lightly parked. That's not a podium project with 2 parking spots per unit. So that's my soapbox. We talked about entitlements. We talked about non-entitlement policies, very, very important. And then we talked about, hey, if you actually want to get this stuff built and you want to get it at the lower income levels, there's got to be something besides LIHTC in the mix. And that is my soapbox, and that's my lightning talk. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Connor.